Now, lately there's been a lot of people talking about the possibility of using time travel in Star Wars Episode 9 to either undo or explain some of the things that have happened thus far in the sequel trilogy. There's even a, shall we say, interesting idea out there that maybe Rey is actually Shmi Skywalker and will go back in time to become Anakin's mother, which would then mean Reylo fans have been hoping for Rey to end up with her great-grandson. Anyway, as creative as that theory is, I think we all know there's little chance of it actually happening. In fact, I think there's little chance of time travel being a part of Episode 9 in any way, shape, or form. After all, Avengers Endgame just used a version of time travel, and something tells me that Star Wars isn't going to want to give off the impression that they're copying Marvel or taking an idea from them. Not that Endgame was the first film we've ever seen with time travel, far from it, as you no doubt know. However, and this is just my personal opinion, but I don't think time travel should ever be a part of Star Wars, or should I say a bigger part, since there is a version of it that I'll talk about in a moment. And one of the reasons is that it usually just makes things messy, that very rarely do stories get the use of it right, or presented in a way that holds up to any real scrutiny or analysis. Most time travel movies or stories are full of holes if you take a close enough look. Many even completely fall apart if you give it any real thought. Then there's also the fact that it takes a lot of the weight or impact out of your story when time travel is a reality, because nothing, no event, ever feels 100% permanent, since things can always be changed by going back in time. And as a comic book fan, let me tell you, one of the most annoying things is how many characters who have died but have come back because of time travel. All that being said though, there is kind of a form of time travel already in the Star Wars canon. A version of it was introduced in Season 4 of the show Rebels, where Ezra Bridger goes through a portal at the site of a Jedi temple, and enters an endless or infinite expanse of space, filled with bridges and portals that is known as the World Between Worlds. And it's here that Ezra watches an event from the past, one he himself was originally at, where Ahsoka Tano battles Darth Vader, and at the last moment, right before Vader can strike her down, Ezra pulls her through the portal and into the World Between Worlds with him. And one thing I can't help but wonder about is what Vader saw and or thought in that moment when she disappeared, or what he thought a few years later when Obi-Wan also vanished the moment before he struck him down. I do wonder if, from Vader's perspective, he believed there was a correlation between the two events, or if he felt somehow cursed because the ones from Anakin's past that he really wanted to kill the most seemed to keep getting the last laugh on him in a sense. But anyway, for now, let's leave further fun speculation on that for another video, and point out the fact that yes, in the Star Wars canon there is, no matter how you want to look at it, time travel. We could get into the semantics of it and say that technically Ezra doesn't travel through time or go back into the past other than his hand, but that doesn't change the fact that a past event was altered by someone in the future relative to it. Because if Ezra doesn't pull Ahsoka through the portal, there's about a 99.9% chance that Vader kills her right there and then, which means no Ahsoka the White at the end of the final episode of Rebels, where we learn that she and Sabine are going to search for the missing Ezra, which also means that Ezra saving Ahsoka in the past has altered the course of his future, assuming they do find him and bring him home, a story I'm very eager to see someday. Anyway, to be honest here, I'm still unsure how I feel about that episode of Rebels and the introduction of any form of time travel in Star Wars, though I know I'm against the future use of it. Because, yeah, I'm happy to learn that Ahsoka is still alive. She's one of my favorite characters after all. I also thought it was a very, very interesting episode overall, and I can't deny it added something completely new and different to the Star Wars canon. That there was this place seemingly in between time and space, in between the living and cosmic force, that could actually be traversed and where the past, and no doubt the future, could be seen through these portals. Again, at face value, that's a cool idea. And it's not like this is coming totally out of the blue and being added by those who don't know or understand the first thing about Star Wars, because I'd imagine that Mortis, which is a place that we see in the Clone Wars animated series and was an idea of George Lucas, is somehow a part of this world between worlds. After all, the Mortis gods were on a mural that opened up a portal to this place, and when we keep in mind that Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka were on Mortis for what seemed like days to them but only seconds had passed by in real space, it's already heavily implied that Mortis exists beyond normal time and space, which opens the doorway to other places or ideas in Star Wars that involve the bending of time and space. Not to mention we have Force ghosts in Star Wars, and if I had to further guess here, I'd say it's this realm, this place between the living and the cosmic force, that a Force Ghost can traverse in order to appear and to speak with the living. In Season 6 of the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon Jinn even tells Yoda that he exists in a place that is not linear, where time doesn't exist, and that everything is basically happening all at once. And Dave Filoni, executive producer of Rebels, who worked very closely with George Lucas for years on the Clone Wars, and talks all the time still about wanting to honor his work, explained the world between worlds in a very similar way to the one that Qui-Gon explained the Force to Yoda. And this happened during an interview that can be found on the Blu-ray extras of Season 4 of Rebels, and I'm sure if you look hard enough you can find it somewhere online too. It's 15 minutes of Filoni talking about the Force, and I can't recommend it enough to any Star Wars fan. Anyway, in this interview, Filoni said of the world between worlds that it's not about time travel. It's about a place where everything comes together, where everything is fluid and not linear, where everything is happening all at the same time. It's not a place of gateways and or doorways that you can just go in and out of. That Ahsoka knows she has to go back from where she came to that very same moment so that she doesn't destroy the natural order and balance of things. That this place is more about knowledge that can be used for good or bad than anything else. And all of that I generally like and find very interesting about the Force, but it does leave us with several questions, the most curious of which just might be, what did Ahsoka do after she went back through the portal armed with knowledge of the future? Because at one point while the two are in there, Ezra sees his master Kanan through a portal at the very moment before he sacrifices himself to save his friends and to save Ezra. And so Ezra is of course tempted to pull Kanan out of that moment to save his life, but if he does, not only will his friends die since Kanan is no longer there to save them, but Ezra will die too and create a paradox, because if Ezra died back then in that blast, how could he be here now to save Kanan in the present? And the thing is, Ahsoka now knows that's going to happen. She's even seen it. She knows that Kanan is going to die, and since her fight with Vader happened roughly 2 years before all of that, she could then seek out Kanan after going back and warn him about what's going to happen in order to prevent the whole thing and to save his life. But she doesn't or can't do that, because if she does, then everything after that, after Kanan is saved, changes, and Ezra may never make his way into the world between worlds then to initially save her and set this chain of events into motion. Which, if that sounded confusing at all, is part of the reason why I generally don't like time travel in stories, unless it's really well done and thought out. And why I don't really want to see it in Star Wars again, because it has a bad way of just making things messy and creating holes in your story. Sure, in this case it's handled relatively well, because Ahsoka is wise enough not to do anything to mess up the timeline. More than likely she spent years in isolation on Malachor to make sure she didn't change anything. But it opens up the possibility for others to find this place in the future and to create paradoxes. And personally, I have little to no interest in more time travel ever finding its way into Star Wars. But speaking of that, and what may, for better or worse, be evidence that Episode 9 could in theory use time travel, or the world between worlds, is that Palpatine, who is coming back in Episode 9, knew the place existed. Hell, he's even trying to enter it in this very episode of Rebels, and it seems like he's been looking for a way into this place for quite some time now, since there's even a minister in this episode, we don't get his actual name, who seems to be heading up the project at the Jedi Temple on Lothal, where the mural of the Mortis gods and the portal is. And this ties into other such trusted servants of Palpatine who knew his little secret that he was a Sith Lord, like Yub Tashu, who we learn about in the Aftermath trilogy, and he was a servant of Palpatine's who was hellbent on bringing him back to life. He even thought that essentially tossing some ancient Sith artifacts into the light side nexus at the center of the planet Jakku might be a part of that, and again, in theory I guess, his actions could somehow be responsible for the birth of Rey. And the really crazy thing about all of this is that Episode 9 could actually be a pretty amazing and complex story if it took all these little pieces of information from these other sources of canon and embraced them and just ran with it. And no, I'm not saying they should actually do that, because pretty much everyone outside of those who keep up with all of this would be utterly lost and confused while watching the movie. And as I've said before, the other sources of canon should always, if they're going to tie into the films, enhance the movies and as tightly as possible walk that very thin line between being relevant to the story and being required reading to understand it. But all that said, I think an interesting story could be woven out of everything we've gotten thus far in the other sources of canon, and I just might take that challenge upon myself in a future video. But as for the real Episode 9 that we're about to get in a little over 4 months now, Well, I'd be stunned, absolutely stunned if they used time travel in it. I'd also be pretty surprised if the world between worlds is used or directly mentioned. I think there's a small chance that it could be implied that Palpatine used it to come back somehow, but as I've said before, I don't expect Episode 9 to be a deep dive into the lore, or to rely all that heavily on the other sources of canon. This will be a rather self-contained movie with loose tie-ins to the bigger story that these three trilogies have been telling overall. J.J. Abrams, the writer and director of 9, has pretty much even said this. And though we've been told by Kevin Smith that the final scene of Episode 9 will melt our minds, I don't think that means we'll see Rey travel back into the past to give birth to Anakin in order to make sure the Skywalkers rise. Again, I don't think we'll see time travel at all, and I for one won't be disappointed if we don't. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about time travel in Star Wars. Is there a place for it in this universe, or would it be the worst mistake they ever make to embrace it? Or should I say, to embrace it further, since we've already seen it in Rebels? And speaking of that, assuming you've seen that episode, what did you think about the way it was used? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.